Okay, so tonight I just wanted to look at the very controversial Indian citizenship bill. And this is another case of the media collaborating with the enemies of civilization. And it's invariably Islamic militants or Islamic supremacists. Um, the Kamal, the Gamal. It's funny. I forget if it was her and Bernie Sanders. Oh no, she's out of the race, so she's completely insignificant, and her thoughts are virtually meaningless right now. I mean, she's still a senator from California, unfortunately, but uh, we can safely ignore her opinion. But it was Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders in particular. He never refrains from taking an opportunity to attack the United States, particularly when it seeks to defend its interests, or other parts of Western civilization or even Eastern civilization that does not want to self destruct or implode. So anyone speaking out for speaking out for civilization, speaking out for security or sovereignty. Bernie Sanders despises them, so that's why he's not only attacking India for this bill, the Indian government, but also he attacks Israel for not kowtowing to Palestinian jihadists. He's friends with the Squad, particularly AOC and Rashida Tlaib, who are I mean those two women are it's a perfect illustration of why India is right to pass this bill. What they're doing, they're basically fast tracking citizenship claims from persecuted minorities in three neighboring countries, which include Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So living as a non-Muslim in those countries is it imperils your life. If you're a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Christian or any variant of non-Muslim, and even some Muslims, for example, in Pakistan, the Ahmadiyya can't practice openly and they're persecuted. So any minority who's living in India in exile for a legitimate reason can apply for citizenship. And this is a very reasonable policy. The problem is it doesn't include Muslims. And there was an Indian journalist from the Washington Post who was being interviewed on NPR today. And like most journalists, she didn't even pretend to disguise her partisanship and bias. And she was attacking Narendra Modi and the BJP, which is a Hindu nationalist party, for this bill. And I should preface this by saying I'm not a fan of Narendra Modi's religious beliefs. He's very um, he does believe in Hindutva, and he spends millions of dollars, his government at least, promoting things like yoga, which for some reason a lot of Christians incorporate into their daily routines. And he believes in all of these ridiculous mythological claims dating back to the Mahabharata and all of these Vedic texts. So I'm not generally in simpatico with Narendra Modi, but this is a perfectly reasonable bill. It's an attempt to provide protection for people who would be either murdered or persecuted and live in under daily duress in these countries, in Afghanistan and Bangladesh and India. And anyone who follows the news from those countries, um, anyone who follows the the news from those countries will realize that these are dangerous places to be a non-Muslim. In Bangladesh, several dozen bloggers, uh, secular activists, atheist professors have been murdered by jihadists, and even now they're prosecuting um, they're prosecuting members from from the JUI, a fundamental Islamist Sunni group that exists in Pakistan as well, and that helped perpetuate the genocide in Bangladesh when it split off from Pakistan. And I don't need to go into why it's unsafe to be a non-Muslim in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, because these are countries where there are thousands of honor killings and jihadist attacks. And it goes without saying that you don't want to live there if you're non-Muslim. Even if you're a Muslim, you don't want to live there, which is why there are so many Pakistanis living in places like New York and Bonn and Berlin, because even Muslims do not want to live in a Muslim dominated society. So this is all, yeah, it used to be East Pakistan, and they're still prosecuting war criminals in Bangladesh from that war. The Islamic Party collaborated with the Pakistani military. I believe the leader was Ayub Khan, although I could be wrong. They collaborated with the military to exterminate their enemies, and they didn't succeed in taking control of the country, and obviously they didn't succeed because Bangladesh seceded with the help of India. But my point is, this is just to illustrate the rational reason why you would want to not live in Muslim societies and Muslim dominated nations. So this is a very reasonable bill. And of course, the response is Muslims go around rioting and murdering and killing anyone who who supports this reasonable bill. They just destroyed a police station in Uttar Pradesh. They've been killing police officers. I don't know if they've been targeting non-Muslims, but I wouldn't be shocked. There have also been protests and riots in Assam. Oh, thanks, David. There have been protests and riots throughout India, and the way this is being framed by the media is that this is a democratic, youth-led rebellion to a discriminatory bill that will tarnish India's secular reputation. When the truth is, this has nothing to do with Hindu nationalism or Narendra Modi being a dictator. This is a reasonable response by a democratic country who doesn't want to be undermined. And the fact is, this citizenship bill, it will apply to Jains, to Christians, to Hindus, to Buddhists. It just won't apply to Muslims who can seek asylum elsewhere, like the Rohingya. If the Rohingya want to settle in a Muslim country where they'll be safe, Bangladesh should be the one responsible for housing them, because these actually are the descendants of Bengali migrant workers brought into Burma by Great Britain. So instead of raising this very logical solution, you have the left and the media again collaborating with the enemies of civilization to demonize a very reasonable response by Narendra Modi and the BJP, which is to offer citizenship to people who can't return to their countries because they'll be killed by Muslims. Now, to say that you should offer citizenship to the same people who would probably kill them seems to me a bit unreasonable. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And the when you get discussions of this, like on NPR, they don't invite anyone to provide a counterpoint. Say, well, why would you offer citizenship to people who might go on to murder actual Indian citizens, whether they're Hindus or Christians or Buddhists or what have you? It doesn't make hi Enoch. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But you never hear this question raised in the media. You never hear them ask, well, hasn't inviting Muslim refugees to America been a bit of a disaster? In Minneapolis, for example, we've had dozens upon dozens of Muslims who were resettled from Somalia go on and join Al Shabaab. They've plotted terrorist attacks both within and outside the United States. They've murdered people in Somalia, other Somalians, and this is as a result of us basically transferring them from refugee camps in Kenya, or taking them from that region of Africa and resettling them in the U.S. when there was no demand for it either from the United States, and there were certainly other Muslim countries which could have accepted them. So it doesn't make any sense, but you won't hear any of this in the mainstream news media. They'd prefer to say, well, Trump is mean because he's drastically curtailed asylum claims, and or rather the acceptance of asylum claims from Muslim nations, when most people who are in need of genuine asylum are not Muslims. Yes, there are small pockets where Muslims are persecuted because they're Muslims. They were isolated, but they are a small minority of the number of people who are persecuted for their religious beliefs. Most of them being Christian. Uh, Followers of Jesus are more relentlessly persecuted than any other faith. So to make it sound like Muslims are the victims here, when first of all they're not. Uh, India is not saying that they're going to strip citizenship of actual Indian citizens who are Muslims. They're saying they're not going to expedite or fast track citizenship for people who are Muslims coming in from other countries, which to me makes perfect sense when you look at what happens when you do that. For example, in the U.S., I just explained how the Somali refugee resettlement has been by and large a disaster, and it's not limited to that. Uh, there have been plots by Iraqis who were resettled in the U.S. to commit terrorist actions. In Arizona, for example, there have been huge problems with Kurdish refugees who were resettled in Tennessee, and the Center for Immigration Studies has done some work research on this. And Mark Krikorian has repeatedly cited all of the either successful or failed terrorist plots conceived by Muslims who came here because of a alleged fear of persecution. For example, Omar Mateen, the Post nightclub shooter, the man who murdered close to 50 individuals in Florida, his parents were Afghan refugees. Not They weren't called refugees, but they were basically Afghans living in exile in Pakistan who were resettled in the United States. So we have a wealth of evidence that if India decided to give these people citizenship, or that there would be problems in the future. Whereas the only if you give citizenship to the Christians and Jains and Buddhists who are seeking refuge in India, they'll probably become productive members of Indian society. So the when you see the media slander Donald Trump for casting doubt on the ability of Muslim refugees to assimilate or to contribute to American society, or Narendra Modi for limiting citizenship among potential refugees from neighboring nations, you have to keep in mind that the people who are promoting these these stories are the same people who lie to you repeatedly every single day. They don't have the interests of Indians or the interest of Americans in mind when they're framing these discussions. And also have to keep in mind, if you've been watching my series breaking down the Quran, there's an injunction on Muslims to go and forcibly spread their religion. If you're giving citizenship to people who are Christians and persecuted people like Aja Bibi, people who come from that background, they're not going to try to actively undermine your society. Whereas if you give them to the Rohingya or the Uyghurs, they probably there's a good chunk, perhaps not the majority, but a good chunk of them will actively seek to promote Islam, which is destabilizing force. So you have to keep that in mind when you hear these very misleading news stories. High Love and Light, they're aimed to propagandize and indoctrinate people. They're not actually aimed to educate people about the status of refugees or people seeking sanctuary in India, um, non-Muslims seeking sanctuary in India. These stories are designed to manipulate public opinion. They're not really designed to educate people, and they prey upon the credulousness and gullibility of the left liberals who just want to see Muslims as a victimized people group and don't actually want to dig down and understand the underlying reasons for this. Why India would want to integrate people who would be contributors to their society and wouldn't want to integrate people who might undermine that society. And it's always cast in these Manichaean terms by the news media because they despise people like Donald Trump or Narendra Modi or Viktor Orban, the Polish Law and Solidarity Party. They despise people who want to preserve their sovereignty. But you need to ask them uh, why are they so insistent that every society be transformed from the top down, that every nation be exposed to the same vulnerabilities as Germany or the UK or other Western nations that have let down their guard and basically accepted these Trojan horses that have gone on to explode in their faces. You have to ask them what the motivation is here. Why do they want to undermine? And Daniel Greenfield Daniel Greenfield has written some great stories for Front Page Mag about this. He's probably the only writer on that website whose stuff I read every single time because he highlights the the real motivations for these people. They're not seeking to maintain India as a secular state, just like they're not seeking to help Americans or cultivate diversity. They're seeking to undermine national sovereignty and to have their own propaganda, namely that Muslims are under attack, that Muslims are this besieged minority, and because some of them are brown instead of white, even though there are a lot of white skinned Muslims, because some of them are brown, therefore anything that you do that affects them negatively is is wrong on its face, and you shouldn't even question that. And it's just a lot of dissimulation. It's not the truth, and that's what people need to understand when they look at these stories like the citizenship bill in India, or when another good example is a story that was also on the same program on NPR. They were discussing terrorism in Western Africa, in the Sahel, places like Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso, and they invited someone from one of these Washington think tanks. I forget if it was the Brookings Institute or one of these, or the Council on Foreign Relations, but one of these typical think tanks that they go to for a soundbite for whenever there's a foreign policy issue. and they asked him what was the issue, why, what could be done to fight terrorism in these countries, and he listed all of these different things. And he said, "Oh, of course, global warming. That's another talking point they use, and this and that, and what can be done." But he never addressed the main issue, which is Islam. The reason that security forces in Mali and Burkina Faso are being attacked, the reason that tourists are being murdered in this part of Africa is because these are nations, these are Islamic nations, and you can't fight that. You can fight it militarily, but it's not going to be successful if the core of the problem remains. Just like if um you can treat someone with radiation therapy or chemotherapy, but if you don't remove the tumor, the cancer is still going to spread. And that's the same thing. If you don't address the topic of Islam, and it's still going to metastasize and infect things, and you're still going to have these wars because that's at the core of the problem. Um, um, if you don't delegitimize and expose the error of Islam, then it doesn't matter how many members of the Islamic Maghreb or ISIS or any other particular jihadist group, Boko Haram. It doesn't matter how many members you kill or you imprison. If you don't eradicate the root, then you're still going to be dealing with the same problem in perpetuity. And that's something that the media and academia and the elites don't want to address because they don't see it as a problem. They see the problem as people who want to defend their country, or particularly or or Christianity in general as the problem. So I just wanted to make a short video about that. I know it doesn't. It's I'll probably be going back to the Quran in my next video, but I just want to address that since it's taking up so much oxygen and there's so much misleading reporting about this. I just wanted to tackle that and clear up some misconceptions head on. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks to Sam Shamoonian. Go to his channel and subscribe. I think he put me over the top in terms of subscribers. So now I have 300 subscribers before New Year's, which is kind of cool, and over 20,000 views, which I know isn't a lot in terms of YouTube creators. In terms of YouTube creators, I'm kind of like a minnow, but it's still impressive considering where I started off at 2 years ago when I started to upload videos. And I've only been live streaming for a little over a year. So hopefully the channel will grow. Like I said, if you like these videos, feel free to share them, post them wherever. And I will see you next time.